When I first heard Wade in the Water, it just blew me away. The power of Ella's voice and then what she does with it. How she takes this piece that many, many people know, but she turns it into something else with her own composition woven in this A Man Went Down to the River.
Wade in the Water is on a 1960 album that was originally titled Negro Folk Rhythms and then has been retitled African American Folk Rhythms. I once heard Ella talk about, she wasn't sure if that was a good idea to update the language, but that's a whole other question. So you'll find different versions of that album. It's the same album. That album was a collaborative album. Kind of half of it was Ella performing songs with some accompaniment. And the second half of it was highlighting a well-known Chicago choir called the Goodwill Spiritual Choir that was affiliated with a progressive church whose pastor was also friendly with Martin Luther King. So it was a kind of civil rights church. The reason that Ella wanted to partner with this choir was that they were known for being able to perform the spirituals in different musical styles, from a style that was like the concertized style that was associated with the Fisk Jubilee singers in the 19th century, to kind of more gospel styles, to maybe more rural styles that haven't been recorded but were passed down through oral tradition. She liked the idea that this choir could represent different styles. She was also interested in emphasizing kind of the rhythmic quality of the spirituals, and you really hear that on this version of the Wade in the Water. So she's playing percussion on it. She's doing it with this choir that is very adept in kind of doing whatever style that she wants. It's kind of like it has a triptych form because she has an arrangement of Wade in the Water, her own composition, A Man Went Down to the River, and then the bookend on the other side is Didn't My Lord Deliver Daniel? Sometimes Didn't My Lord Deliver Daniel, depending on which version you see listed. It's this really interesting, quite rhythmic, propulsive triptych. This album was, I think, really misunderstood when it came out. It actually went against some of the expectations of folk music enthusiasts of the time. There was some criticism that the album presented the spirituals in too stylized and formal and polished a way. In other words, spirituals and blues and Black folk music was like part of what people went to folk clubs to go listen to. But at that time, there was a certain strain within the folk revival where people wanted to hear what they thought of as more authentic representations of those sounds. And a highly trained choir felt to some people like something old and not something particularly quote unquote authentic. Let's say they associated a certain kind of sound and kind of arrangement of spirituals with a representation of Black suffering that fit into their political needs at the time for civil rights. And so when this album came out, some people were very confused by it because it seemed like a throwback. And Tim can talk about what happened. There's a kind of irony that she was interested in sharing all of this with people. And this choir was well known and popular for South Side audiences. And I think there were white folk audiences who didn't know that arranged spirituals were quite popular with Black audiences.
Right.
Wow.
And there was this disconnect.
Wow.
And I think this album in some ways fell within the cracks of that disconnect.
Right.
Tim, you can say what happened to it.
Right. I mean, I think you have to note that the audiences whose expectations weren't being met by this album were white folk fans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
They were people who were buying releases that were on Folkways Records because that was kind of the gold standard of folk music. It confused these white audiences having such a formal style on the recording. The irony, I guess, that kind of pulls the rug out of the claim to lack of authenticity to the recording is that Alvin Ailey found the recording that Ella made, and it became a landmark part of Alvin Ailey's masterpiece, Revelations. And Ella's music is still used, her arrangement is still used, and she is credited for it in performances of Revelations today, as it has been since 1960.
Wow, that's fascinating. Let's listen to this song, Wade in the Water.